but I'm going to talk to you tonight about Be Smart, which is a program developed by Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America to bring together kids, parents, and adults concerned about kids, guns, and safety. Next slide, please. We know in the U.S., the second leading cause of death for children is firearms, and the first leading cause of death for Black children. As this slide shows, 1,600 children under the age of 18 are killed with guns in the U.S. every year, an average of 5 children every day. When children in America are killed with guns, the majority of those deaths, 53%, are homicides. That's nearly 900 children per year. Another 700 children die by firearm suicide each year, and 90 are unintentionally shot and killed. Next slide, please. We know that approximately 5.4 million children in the U.S. live in a household with at least one loaded, unlocked gun. And this number has likely increased in light of the surge of gun sales during the COVID-19 pandemic. While school shootings and mass shootings typically make national headlines, the reality is for children under the age of 13, gun homicides frequently occur in the home. And one study showed that nearly 90% of unintentional shooting deaths and injuries among children under the age of 15 occur in the home. What's more, we know that incidents of gunfire on school grounds, up to 80% of the shooters under the age of 18 obtained the guns from their friends or their family members. Now, I know this is an emotional issue, and we come from many different walks of life. Many of you are parents. Some of you may be gun owners. You may have a personal experience with guns, and some of you may have been impacted by gun violence. Next slide, please. But for now, let's leave politics at the door and agree on these 3 things. We all want kids to grow up happy and healthy. We each have the right to make responsible decisions about how to protect our homes, families, and communities, including whether or not to have a gun in our home. And if we can prevent even one child death or injury, it is our responsibility to do so. So we're not here to talk about laws or policies, so we're going to just set those aside. Next slide, please. I want to take a few minutes to talk specifically about what the consequences of unsecured guns look like. On this slide, you'll see just a few headlines from stories from across the country. And although we know there are many incidents that are unreported, the slide, the first story, you may remember this story from the news. In January of 2018, there was a school shooting in Kentucky at Marshall High School. At least 16 people were injured and 2 people, Bailey Holt and Preston Cope, were killed. The 16-year-old shooter had gained access to his stepfather's unsecured pistol from his bedroom. The next tragedy took place in May of 2018. A 4-year-old boy from Louisa, Virginia, unintentionally shot his 2-year-old brother after accessing an unsecured gun that was kept in an upper cabinet. The next headline talks about when kids are looking to carry guns out of fear and how easy access can help facilitate the cycle of violence. 17-year-old Zeke told the Jackson, Mississippi Free Press that some young people in his community carry guns out of fear of being robbed or shot and believe that having a gun will allow them to defend themselves. Let me also point out our final story about 13-year-old Mikey from Brewster, New York. Mikey was a friendly, popular 8th grader, an expert bowler, an avid athlete, and he loved video games. In January of 2018, Mikey came home from school, took one of his father's unlocked, loaded guns, and shot himself. His family knew Mikey to be a happy kid, and they don't believe he had planned to die that day. But with easy access to a loaded gun, Mikey made an impulsive decision that tragically became a fatal one. All 4 of these stories show the fallout of when young people get their hands on unsecured guns. No story is quite the same, but they're all tragic and they're all preventable. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that even if you are practicing secure storage, or even if you don't have a gun in your home, you can't be sure about other homes. You can't be sure how responsible other people are being. And that's where our Be Smart program becomes helpful. What can we do? We can learn to be smart. Next slide, please. Let's start with this. Secure your guns in homes and vehicles. 13 million households with children contain at least one gun. And the majority of children in gun-owning households know where that gun is stored. And we already know that the incidence of gunfire on school grounds, the majority of the shooters obtained the guns from their homes, or the homes of friends or relatives. Like the tragedy that unfolded at Marshall County High School. So what do I mean by securing guns? Guns should be stored locked and unloaded with ammunition stored separately. And remember, hiding a gun is not securing a gun. We know that can lead to tragedy. And remember Zeke from Mississippi, who spoke about the complicated safety reasons that push some teens to want a gun? Keep in mind that kids may feel a variety of emotions about guns: fear, curiosity, fascination. As adults, it's our responsibility to prevent easy access to guns. Research also finds that secure storage is associated with a decreased risk of firearm suicide and unintentional firearm injury around children. One study showed that households that locked both firearms and ammunition had a 78% lower risk of self-inflicted firearm injuries among children and teenagers, and an 85% lower rate of unintentional injuries. Some communities use secure practices, commonly used secure practices include a cable lock, a lockbox, a firearm safe, or you can buy a large firearm safe. And remember, storing a gun in a glove box is not considered secure storage. Next slide. M stands for model. Every law-abiding adult has the right to decide whether or not to have a gun. But you can't rely on curious kids not to find that gun. As we saw on the slide before, the majority of the children are aware of where that gun is kept. And many of them report handling the gun without their parents' knowledge. Furthermore, a quarter of the parents did not know their children had handled that gun. It's always an adult's responsibility to prevent unauthorized access to guns, not a curious child's responsibility to avoid guns. Talk to your kids about gun safety, but remember, that's a precaution and not a guarantee. One study found that young children who go through a week-long gun safety training are just as likely as children with no training to approach or play with a gun when they find one. So modeling responsible behavior means that smart adults make kids don't have access to opportunities to access guns. That said, you can't control the environment your child is in all the time. So you should teach them not to touch a gun if you come across one, real or pretend, and give them the tools to get out of a dangerous situation and alert an adult. As an adult, it's your responsibility to do everything you can to prevent them from getting in a dangerous situation to begin with. Now, I have handouts about how to talk to kids about guns, and I have lots of materials about how to have these conversations. I put my contact information in the chat at the beginning, and I will do it again when I finish talking. If you get in touch with me, I will see that you get any materials that you might find helpful. Next slide, please. The A stands for ask. As we have mentioned, approximately 5.4 million children in a household with at least one loaded, unlocked gun. So that's why you need to ask about firearms at other homes when your child visits. Now, for parents and caretakers, we know there are many things we ask before we allow a child to go to a friend's home. We ask if the parents are going to be supervising. We ask about TV time. We ask about bedtime. We ask about access to alcohol. We need to ask about guns. Next slide, please. Asking about guns in the home should be as natural as asking about any other safety issue, but it can seem awkward at first. So try making it part of your general safety conversation. You might try asking via email or text if you're uncomfortable at first. Next slide. Let's talk about the R, recognizing the role of guns in suicide. Access to guns can mean the difference between life and death. We saw that in Mikey's story. As our children get older, you may need to consider taking another look at your storage methods. If you've been using a simple cable lock, you might want to think about getting a gun safe. We all know how resourceful children can be, and we also know how curious they are. As they get older, we need to make sure that they are kept safe from getting a hold of our guns. Also, if you know your loved one is in distress, you might want to consider temporarily removing a gun from the home. Take this information into consideration. Most people who attempt suicide do not die unless they use a gun. In fact, approximately 90% of suicide attempts with a gun result in death, a much higher fatality rate than any other means of self-harm. This contributes to the fact that 40% of child suicides involve a gun. If you consider temporarily removing a gun from your home, how do you do that? Where do you bring it? Well, local law enforcement might be willing to store your guns. Some licensed gun dealers or gun ranges will temporarily store guns. Or you can temporarily store your guns in the home of a friend or family member. To manage risk for that friend or family member, you should lock any guns that you transfer and not provide the key and the code. Now, we do have a list of places in Maryland that will store guns. And again, if you need that list, get in touch with me and I can provide that information for you. Next slide, please. The National Youth Survey conducted by the CDC showed that 17% of high school students surveyed had seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year. Another study showed that 41% of adolescents in gun-owning households reported having easy access to the guns in their home. Stop and think about these two numbers and how they overlap. As we discussed earlier, research shows that secure firearm storage is associated with a decreased risk in child suicide. So make sure that as the children get older, you have come up with a better way of securing your guns. Next slide, please. I have materials about National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and how to get in touch with other suicide prevention organizations. And I also have information about warning signs of suicide. So again, if you would like more materials about that, contact me and I will see that you get whatever you might need. Next slide, please. The T tells the power of being smart. Your voice and all voices are critical. We have heard from people that because of Be Smart, they know to ask about the presence of guns before their children go to other people's homes. That they have talked to family members about guns in the homes when they have recognized the roles of guns in suicide. And that gun owners are modeling responsible behavior as a direct result of being smart. So, who are you going to tell to be smart today? Research shows that law enforcement, the military, hunting, and outdoor groups are particularly effective at communicating about safe storage practices. Next slide, please. So, again, be smart. Secure all guns in homes and vehicles. Model responsible behavior. Ask about unsecured guns in other homes. Recognize the role of guns in suicide and tell your peers to be smart. So, last slide, please. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. If you have any other group that you belong to that you think might like to see this presentation, get in touch with me. I can arrange for that to happen. And again, if you want any more information about Be Smart, also get in touch with me and I will also make that happen. Again, thank you so much for having me with you today.
Thank you so much, Debbie. The Be Smart Initiative, first of all, the acronym is so helpful to portray such a wide swath of important information in such a concise way. The Be Smart website also has a lot of really great resources and resources in both English and Spanish, which is such a great addition. And so I'm going to put the website in the chat for those who might want to do a little bit more looking around a little bit more. And I know, Debbie, you said you were going to put your contact information in the chat. Are there any questions for Debbie or about the Be Smart program? You're welcome to raise your hand or put it in the Q&A section.
Hi, Debbie. We see a question. How do you have these conversations with family members to address if they have guns in the home and how they're stored or safely or not?
One of the things that a lot of people will tell me having the conversations with family members is just talking about your own feelings about guns. Now, we all have our thoughts about it, and especially if you want to have the conversation about are there guns in somebody's home, volunteer your own information first. You know, I'm bringing my child to your house, or you're bringing your child to my house. We supervise snacks. We only allow half an hour TV, and we don't have any guns. So you volunteer your information first. If you have a family member that you know has a gun, that can be a difficult conversation, but it helps if you come armed with your data. You tell them, you know, we know he's going to find the gun. He finds everything else we've hidden, so he's going to find the gun. And often when I give these presentations, people will raise their hand and say, well, I've told my child not to bother guns. And I always say, you know, I raised 2 kids, and my kids are good kids, and they didn't give me too much trouble, but they weren't perfect, and they didn't do everything I ever told them to do. And there were times that I caught both of them doing stuff they weren't supposed to do. And so that includes, yes, getting into things that I specifically told them not to do. So, you know, you just have to be honest with your family about what your own feelings are.
Thank you. Great question.
And someone said, an anonymous question, not to get too personal, but they're curious, how did you get involved with the organization?
I have been involved with Be Smart ever since it started. I grew up in a very rural part of Virginia. I don't personally own a gun, but I have lots of family members who do. My father taught me to shoot when I was about 10 years old, and part of the things that we practice in my house, along with teaching me how to shoot, he taught me to be safe with guns and all the rules about being secure with guns. And I remember things like when we finished shooting our guns, because we've got to do target practice, we had all these huge fields around the house. And when we finished shooting our guns, we unloaded them. No loaded guns in the house. That was part of the rules. And this message of safety was just embedded in me from the time I was just, you know, a little thing. And so when this initiative was launched, it seemed like a perfect fit, because this was how I was brought up to be around guns, to always never bring a loaded gun in the house, never put the ammunition when we get it. My dad always kept the guns locked. I guess he was before his time.
Thanks for sharing that, Debbie.